I was in my early 20s and I was really struggling with premature ejaculation. I was about to have sex with my partner and she got on top of me. She started riding me and it was great and it was really connective and we were in love. And then I came in like 30 seconds and she looked at me with this look in her eyes of just like utmost frustration and almost rage and anger. And she was like, "That's it." Like deeply scarred me. And there's like a little minor trauma that actually happened there that showed up in me that made me actually afraid to interact with women or even flirt with women for a while after that, because I was afraid of being the guy that would ejaculate too soon.
If you are making love to a man who isn't in his heart, who isn't attuned, longer is not going to be better.
While sexual pleasure is happening, that actually feels better than the typical ejaculation. And those doors can open up in those extended lovemaking experiences too, but only if the heart is open to some degree. I feel so much more open in my system. I feel so much more alive when I have semi-regular like anal experiences.
Every heterosexual man should experience anal penetration just to understand what it's like to have a pussy.
Shall we do some sex magic?
Yay! I'm Layla Martin. I'm your host of This Tantric Life. This podcast is for you to learn about and be able to use the incredibly powerful system of Tantra in your life. I have been teaching and studying classical and neo-Tantra for over 20 years. And when you apply that to sex, love, and relationships, as I love to do, you end up having conscious relationships, the deepest, most epic and magical sex, and the kind of intimacy that you get to be grateful for on your deathbed. Hi, and welcome to This Tantric Life. I am Layla Martin. So I'm still recovering from Burning Man. This podcast got started in like a whirlwind of chaos. When you're putting on eyelashes, I actually literally glued my eyelid to the top of my face, but we have solved that issue. I've still got burner dust on my running shoes right now that I am wearing with this glamorous outfit. And yet we are here. We're late, but we are here with one conversation that I'm so excited to share with you. I'm here with Taylor Johnson. He is a sexologist and a men's sexuality coach. And if there is one podcast episode for you to watch where you can fully understand what it means to last as long as you want as a man, to separate ejaculation and orgasm and what that can do for your experience of sex and your partner's experience of sexuality, we're going to talk about things like anal de-armoring, which I personally love. I ran into these friends at the Burn who had known me for 11 years and they were like, "Layla, remember how we met you? You were like at this like private play experience in New York City in the middle of the living room teaching people how to anally de-armor themselves." And I was like, I don't entirely remember that, but it sounds on brand. And so we are going to talk through so many specifics and give you step-by-step instructions of how you can amplify and extend and enhance your sexuality as a man. And if you are a partner of a man, this will give you a deep dive understanding of how to help support him in his process of growing in his sexuality, his sexual empowerment, and his understanding of sacred sexuality in his own body and psyche. So what we can do for men and what men's sexuality can be is something that society doesn't yet fully understand. I'm so excited to share with you what is possible today. Welcome, Taylor.
Yeah. What an intro. Thank you for having me here.
Totally. So give us the deep dive of how did you get on this path? How did you get into sacred sexuality? And some juicy details about your own sexual development and experience.
So I'm happy to talk about myself and all things ejaculation and anal. And first, though, I want to start with a little backstory. A few years ago, I surveyed all the people who are on my email list, and I got hundreds of responses from women, hundreds of responses from men. It was all around ejaculation and all around sex and preferences around that, experiences around that. And I bring this up because in your intro, you talked about how men can learn how to last as long as they want. And a lot of guys out there think that this is kind of like the holy grail of sex. But when I surveyed, I think it was like 300 or 400 women that responded to this, I asked them the question, have you ever been with a man that could last as long as they wanted? And it was something around 90% of these women said yes. And then I asked them a question that said, what was that like? And I went through with some highlighters and coded the different responses. And to my like very big surprise and kind of shock, roughly 90% of these women said it was a negative experience. And it kind of blew my mind because I used to struggle with premature ejaculation intensely. Like I was the guy that would ejaculate in 0 seconds, slowly made my way up to 2 seconds to 3 seconds, et cetera, et cetera. But like I struggled so much with this. And so for the longest time, I thought this for sure was like, if I could do this, I would achieve God level of sex. You know, I could just last forever. Everything would be fine. No other problems, right? But 90% of these women said it was a bad experience. The really interesting part was the other 10% said that this was one of their most amazing sexual experiences they've ever had. And then they said why. And it was because the man, in addition to his ability to control his ejaculation and be present with them in that way, he actually showed up with deep presence and emotional connection and vulnerability, and his heart was involved, compared to what they said about the other 90%, where they said the men were sort of performative and they were kind of trying to show off, and there was a disconnection, and the men were just like doing what they learned, you know, and there wasn't actually that connection piece there. So for me, it really seems like if you're struggling from premature ejaculation and you want to last longer, sure, do that, but also learn how to involve your heart, also learn how to involve your whole body, also learn how to spread pleasure throughout your whole system and really be connected and attuned to the person you're making love with. And that's when all the doors of all the magical stuff can open up that you talk about, that I talk about, that I'm sure we're going to get into.
Thank you for bringing that up, because I do know for so many women, if you are making love to a man who isn't in his heart, who isn't attuned, longer is not going to be better.
Yeah.
In fact, longer is actually going to be worse.
Totally.
And so mastering sexual skills without doing the underlying energetic intimacy building, and in many cases healing, right? Like in my men's sexual mastery program, it's a lot about healing, like your relationship to your father, your relationship to masculinity, you're like allowing your primal fuck to be connected to your body and not some story that you're running in your head, right? Because this is what makes a man a mind-blowing lover. And I've been going through something with my partner where, you know, he has at different times in his life mastered ejaculation where he could last as long as he wanted. Right now, he's like a little bit out of practice kind of as we got together. Plus, I'd love to hear your perspective on this. I think sometimes when a man like falls deeply in love as well, it can challenge some of those teachings and trainings that he's been in, because there's a whole new level of emotional connection and ecstasy and feeling, right? And what I've seen with men and what I've seen in my partner is how quickly they can like shame themselves or self-criticize. And the thing that I felt is like, sure, babe, like if you could go for like an hour or two, the gift to me in a man being able to go that long is that my ecstasy does go deeper and deeper and deeper, right? When I am held by a man who's deeply connected and he can last a very long time, it's like there's layers to how much my body can open and how much ecstasy I can touch and how much God I can feel and how much energy can activate inside of me. But those things only unlock with a man who is deeply present, with a man who is heart open, connected to me. If he was just fucking and able to last as long as possible, my body would just be like, no, thank you. Doesn't matter how hard you can fuck or how long you can last. Without those integrated pieces, it doesn't touch my body to the core. And when he, let's say, ejaculates sooner than he meant to or sooner than he wanted to, I almost never feel this sense of like, oh, why, like, what, you know, sometimes like every once in a while, if I'm being totally honest, there's a moment of like, oh, it would have been nice to go longer, you know? And there's just this epic gratitude in me to be so served, so loved, to experience sex like that from a man is like the greatest gift. Even if it's 15 minutes, 20 minutes, 30 minutes, like, holy shit. And so that's what I would love for men to know is how much of a gift your sexuality is to anyone who wants to receive it. And how, yes, doing the training to be able to be a masterful lover technically can help expand that experience for your lover. But that deeper work, like you're saying, of connecting to your heart, of emotionally empathizing, of being able to be so deeply intimate, like that is the ultimate gift. And to work on that, it's like, yes, to be a better lover, but also because of like, holy shit, like to be able to experience yourself that way, for your lover to be able to experience you that way, it's like a lifetime's gift.
Totally. And what I heard you say is it allows you go into all these really wild, amazing orgasmic layers that you never would have been able to experience if it was shorter. And a lot of guys are out there thinking like, okay, well, that's great for her. But what about me? Do I just like kind of stay the course and then ejaculate? And this is where I kind of want to break the paradigm or shift things up and say, no, actually for us, people in bodies like this, like we can expand and expand and expand, and our pleasure can go up and up and up and up. And we can access those layers too. We can access those layers of wild, like full body orgasm without ejaculation, wild cosmic experiences where we feel connected to something greater than ourselves while sexual pleasure is happening that actually feels better than the typical ejaculation. And those doors can open up in those extended lovemaking experiences too, but only if the heart is open to some degree, only if there's some level of emotional intelligence there, only if there's some level of energetic openness there as well. And so, I mean, this kind of flies in the face of a lot of programming we get as guys where you're supposed to, like, you know, shove it all down, don't experience emotions, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. But no, we actually really need to experience those in intentional, useful ways, because when we do that, it's saying, oh, actually, body, energetic flow is a good thing. So if you let your emotions flow, then you can get into the sexual experience, and all of a sudden it's much easier for your sexual pleasure to move from your genitals up into your heart, maybe your back, maybe down your legs. Maybe all of a sudden your mind is blown because you feel like your arm is coming. You've never experienced anything like this before. I mean, this happened to me the first time I had a full body, what I'll call a tantric orgasm. Like my whole system felt like it was ejaculating for like an extended period of time, but better than that. And I wasn't even at risk of ejaculating. Like I wasn't on the 0 to 95 scale. I was on a totally other paradigm of the sexual experience. And it was just going and going, and it was psychedelic. And it totally changed my whole perspective of what's possible in sex.
Look, we teach a lot here. You know, we teach anal de-armoring, we teach full body orgasm, we teach heart orgasm. But now in this podcast, we're actually going to teach arm orgasm. So I think we should. Yeah. All right, let's break this down. I'm here to let you know that if you want to stay connected to my teachings and if you want to support this podcast, the best way to do it is to sign up for my email list. Email list sounds old school, and yet it is where I share my most intimate teachings, the path, process, heartbreak, and triumph of my life, and so much of the content that I make for you on a regular basis. So the way you get on the email list is by heading over to laylamartin.com, put your email address into any of the boxes. You can also sign up for cool practices like sex magic or energy orgasm, totally free. Heading on over to laylamartin.com, signing up with your email address. This supports the podcast. It supports this entire work and is the number one way for you to receive the highest teachings of this path. Let's talk the technical first, and then let's talk heart awakening and energetic empathy. Okay. So let's explain how ejaculation is different from orgasm in a man's body.
All right. So I'm sure there's some guys listening who have had an ejaculation without an orgasm. Like you've had an ejaculation without some sort of pleasure, right? I've experienced that. It's like, what the fuck just happened? It's kind of bizarre. There are other people who have experienced orgasm without ejaculation. So what's the difference? In my mind, when a lot of guys think of orgasm, the ejaculation and the orgasm, they're linked immediately. Like they're inseparable in the brain. And if you have an ejaculatory orgasm, you have this peak of a 7-second experience, right? And then there's the release that happens afterwards. And a lot of guys go into sex with this idea of, oh, I need this release. I'm looking for this release. There's the buildup and then there's the release, right? In my experience and my belief, like the release isn't actually part of the orgasm in the same way. Like the release comes from the ejaculation. The release comes from the actual literal release of the neurochemicals and the hormones that happen during ejaculation. The orgasm is the peak of pleasure. The ejaculation catalyzes this physiological response that happens through the ejaculation of the semen, etc. And so when a lot of guys think about having an orgasm without ejaculation, they think, ooh, how can I have that same contractile experience with that same level of release afterwards and feel that kind of like, that happens. That is nice. But in my experience, having an orgasm without ejaculation doesn't come with that level of release. Like, because the release has happened in other ways. Maybe it's through exercise. Maybe it's through energetic practice. Maybe it's something to get my body to the state where I don't have this buildup of tension that I need to release so that I can go to those levels of pleasure and experience more waves of orgasm through my whole body that don't just exist for 7 seconds, but they might flow up and crash like ocean waves over and over again throughout my whole system. And it's kind of mystifying and weird to understand if you haven't totally experienced it, but that's like the intro version of what I would say.
Great. And so if you're listening and you're like, but I want that release, why would you be willing to give up that release?
That's a very good question. And that goes into a whole other realm of what I practice and teach, which I call integrative semen retention, which is I have the belief that our ejaculations as men impact our entire life much more than we might think. So you have an ejaculatory orgasm, great, you get that release. How does that affect you for the next day or the next 2 days or the next 3 days? And there is some physiological evidence to show that it does actually affect you for this amount of time. And so for me, I found that I really want to live like the fullest life I possibly can. I want to create a successful business. I want to have a relationship that thrives. I want to like experience the most out of this gift of being on this planet. So in order to do that, I need to optimize my system. Oh, maybe in order to do that, I need to stop ejaculating every day. Maybe I need to stop watching porn and getting off and having these releases that ultimately when I release my ejaculation, I'm telling my brain, oh, you have succeeded at finding a mate and impregnating and perpetuating the species. You can take a break now, Whereas my theory is that if I retain and experience that and let that build up inside of me, then my body goes through this process of like, oh, it's time to perform. Evolutionarily speaking, it's time to go out and find a mate. It's time to go procreate. Then I can transmute that energy, that desire for procreation into fuel that I can use to do whatever I want, like create my business, create a creative project, make a song, sing, perform, do whatever. But that becomes fuel to do something else.
Right. And this is the core of the Taoist sexual teachings, right? That you have this generative life force energy, right? They call it Jing. And it's supposed to be one of the most powerful, creative, energetic forces in the universe, right? Because the way I understand it is like, in every moment, the universe is creating something out of nothing, right? That's the miracle of being alive. Like there could be fucking nothing any moment, right? Yeah. We could all go back into the black hole, right? We could all go back into the Big Bang. Everything could be done. But instead, every moment, life is heart beating, right? There's a moment of mystery and then a moment of experience. Mm-hmm. Mystery into experience is a birth process, right? And so right before mystery and experience dance together, it's like they're making love. They're actually making love and then they're creating. So our own, in the microcosmic map, in these Tantric teachings and Taoist teachings, that we are a map of the universe. Mm-hmm. Our sexual energy and our actual sexual fluids are part and parcel of that universal impulse of creativity. And so the Taoists are saying like, yeah, you can ejaculate out your life force energy, right? And then you actually feel tired and depleted because you just gave your life force energy theoretically to your body, which doesn't know any difference, to the next generation to create a baby, right? And so what you're saying, and what I found to be true as well, is that you can take that life force energy up and in rather than emitting it. You take it up and in, and it attenuates your entire body and physiology to be in a state of heightened creative tension, heightened creative expression. And as you're saying, you can take that into business, you can take that into relationship, you can take that into fucking. And a lot of guys who practice semen retention report that. I feel more energetic. I feel more alive. And, I always teach like nothing should be always. Like it's not like you can never ejaculate again as long as you live. But what you can do is experiment with this. Try it out and see what happens in your own body and your own physiology.
100%. Yeah, to be clear, I love ejaculatory orgasms.
Yeah.
They're great. They're great. And I love sharing them with my partner.
Yeah.
And they're 100 times better when I do them with intention and not by default.
Yeah.
Right. So for example, we made love this past Sunday. We had a really beautiful, extended lovemaking session. And I knew that we were going to come do this podcast here this week. And I thought, I really want to be on, I don't want to just release and be sort of in vacation mode this week. So I decided to have that lovemaking experience. And we ended by doing some breathing together, and I didn't ejaculate. And to be clear, for you listening, I did not feel like I was relinquishing my pleasure. I was in full pleasure the whole time, and I was totally satisfied, and I did not get blue balls, and I don't get blue balls. I feel great. I feel fucking awesome. And I experience, orgasmic pleasure moving through my system. And then after the lovemaking experience, I don't feel like I need to conk out. I can still be there in that energy. I can still be there in the energy. The energy still exists between my partner and I. That charge doesn't take a break and die off for a while. It's still there. It's a really, really beautiful thing to experience.
Yeah.
And play with.
And one of the reasons that I love being with a man who's trained this way is there's usually a certain amount of wildness and pleasure and ecstasy or even orgasm that I can go into before my partner's body will want to respond with an ejaculation, right? And so it's almost like their ceiling on how much pleasure they can feel or how much erotic, wild, feminine they can feel before their body's like, okay, must ejaculate, ends up in some ways being a ceiling on how wild and expressed and pleasure-filled I can be. Now, in our default world, right, where people are playing out more like sex in their heads, right, or pornographic, where like, you know, you were saying a man in his heart, a man feeling his feelings, like that's not what we were raised to see. We were raised to see like man as sexual machine, right? Which ask any woman, as you did in your survey, they're like, do you want a robotic male sexual machine who's like just fucking jackhammering? And every woman in the world, maybe not everyone, but I'm gonna go ahead and put myself out there and say the vast majority of people are like, fuck no, like, fuck no, I don't want that. Right.
Yeah,
so
totally.
But the big lie that men have been told is that's either what women want or that's what would feel good to them. Right. Like, I'm like machine, I'm taking advantage, like, you know, I'm doing this to the feminine. And the crazy thing is there's a dehumanization in that actually feels terrible to the male heart, psyche, and body. But a lot of men don't even realize that. They don't even realize that's happening. Totally. And when they're in that state, they can't let themselves feel, right? Because once you start to feel, it will shift that whole sexual performance, that whole jackhammer thing. So what I found is like, a lot of women then have gone numb to be able to tolerate that. A lot of women have shut down because they have met their own form of jackhammer robot and it's scary. It's too intense. It doesn't feel good to their body. And so what do you do when something is scary, intense, and doesn't feel good? You actually contract. So you're either going to go numb or you're going to physiologically shut down. And that's why so many women have pain during sex. That's why so many women don't feel super orgasmic. That's why so many women don't feel deeply expressed. Who wants to open into that expression of male sexuality, right? And so our closure as a species sexually has gone hand in hand together, right? Like women have shut down, but so have men. And so we have to open back up together. So what I feel as a woman is a lot of women are so shut down and so not sexually expressed yet that they're not even challenging to their male partners because it's like, well, she's so kind of shut down and not feeling that much pleasure. So I can stay in jackhammer robot mode, right? Once the feminine starts to awaken and my body is pretty awakened now, what I find is my feeling and my pleasure and my ecstasy opens him, right, into feeling and ecstasy and pleasure. And he's obviously opening me, like we're opening each other. And if he has conditioned his body to say, like, I don't want to feel, I don't want to connect, my opening will actually trigger his ejaculation because he gets to stop feeling once I open. So what I find is that we actually train each other as lovers, and the deeper and wider and more that I can feel, and the more that he's actually trained his body to feel more without having to go into ejaculation, the higher the states of ecstasy that we can actually touch together. And so there's this beautiful kind of co-creative process. And I want to share that because I think a lot of women think my male partner should ejaculate. If he doesn't ejaculate, something's wrong, or they can kind of subtly be pushing him to ejaculate rather than understanding like the gorgeous gift of helping to train him to be able to have the capacity to experience and hold more pleasure, more intimacy, more ecstasy, more energy before his system is like, oh, damn, I'm going to ejaculate. Because there's this hidden mechanism in us psychologically where we actually upper limit on pleasure. We upper limit on ecstasy. We upper limit on intimacy. We upper limit on love. And so we'll actually climax, shut down, or ejaculate to decompress the situation and actually let it all out. And so what you're training is, yes, how to last longer, but it's also for men, as you said, to be able to, I want to say the word tolerate more pleasure, more ecstasy, more feeling in their bodies before they feel the need to ejaculate and shut it down.
Yeah. Let me semantically change that from tolerate to expand the capacity to experience more pleasure.
Yeah.
It's not like a tolerating thing.
That's my Catholicism. That's my hidden Catholicism in there. I'm like, we're tolerating the pleasure. We're just tolerating it. That's all.
Yeah. Like if you're a guy and you played video games, you think about, you have different categories of different things in your life. Like you have the strength, you have agility, you have sexual pleasure, sexual capacity, right? We're just making the bar go higher in the amount of sexual pleasure you can experience before you ejaculate, to the point where that bar kind of expands into another sidebar that can even go beyond the ejaculatory reflex into other pleasure. But you said something that I think is really important that I want to just touch on. And it's another rabbit hole we don't have to go down completely, but just to say that there's a lot of men who think, oh, women experience this thing and da 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 da. There's a lot of women who think, oh, men experience this thing and da 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 da. I think the important thing that I want to say is like, we're all suffering in the current system.
Yes.
Like we're all suffering in the current system. We're all limited by it. We all have different things that we experience that are hard, that might be hard for other genders to understand. But it's really important to me to say that like, oh, men are having challenging times too in the current system.
Absolutely.
And like, it's important for a man to realize like, hey, other men are experiencing this too, and it's okay. And we've got to talk about this, and we've got to talk about it together. And we don't need to make it like the woman's responsibility to mother us and figure it out, but we've got to take some responsibility and like start unblocking some of this stuff, like start undoing some of the stuff society has done to us, like connect with other men. I've been in men's groups for over 10 years now. They've like fundamentally changed my life, like to actually be able to connect with other men around this stuff, rewire, reprogram, and then come to a relationship with a woman from that place is really powerful.
Yeah.
And yes, like you can help a man train, but ultimately a man is going to need to want to do that himself. Because there's a lot of women out there, at least that I've seen and talked to, who like try to bring this stuff to their male partner, and the male partner's like, no, not interested, and then the relationship either stays together and it's shitty or it like falls apart.
Totally.
The desire really has to be authentically from men. I get emails from women who are like, hey, can I buy your course for my lover, my partner? And I'm like, no. No, you could. I can't stop you from putting your credit card information in, but I think it's a really bad idea because they're going to be the ones that need to want this themselves. And if they feel you like forcibly like pushing this upon them, it's not a good idea. And I'm not hearing you say like you're forcibly pushing sexual ecstasy upon your partner, but I think you know the dynamic that I'm talking about.
Absolutely. I do think it's a big female curiosity of like, how can I spark this interest in my partner? And I do think it's okay for that to be a core need in your relationship. Yeah. Like I actually need my male partner to do some work because I have friends in my already blessed community who are like, my male partner closes his eyes and fantasizes about something else, and we have sex in almost the same position, and we're married, and I can't do that. Yeah. So like, it's both of like, no, you can't make a man want this and you can't make him do the work. But as a woman, you can be a stand for like what kind of sexuality and intimacy you deserve. And that is okay. There is something else I want to say too, before we get into like the nitty gritty details of how one would do this, which is, I celebrate the fuck out of male sexuality. And what I think has happened is when you take a lot of male sexual expression and you remove his heart, right? You shut down his heart and you add what I think is part of the trauma conditioning of the past few thousand years, which is dehumanizing others, right? Like this woman is less human, so she deserves less political, economic, and social power, right? This class of people is less human, right? Totally. So this was part of the patriarchal brainwashing that isn't natural to men, but it was part of this toxic trauma-based system, right? Yeah. A lot of men are feeling shame around their sexuality right now, and they're feeling shut down and they're feeling attacked by society. But so much of male sexual expression that can be natural, right? Objectification, like loving, like the form of things and getting turned on by like the beauty or physical appearance of your lover, right? When you're objectifying a woman and it's disconnected from your heart and it's dehumanizing, meaning like the only thing you're good for is how hot you are, it's disgusting. When you're objectifying in your heart, you're like, God, you're hot and I fucking love you and I have all these amazing feelings for you and you're hot and also you're spiritual and brilliant and genius and you're an artist. You see the whole picture, then that objectification feels so good, right? And so this to me is the re-understanding of male sexuality. Like primal fucking, if you're not in your heart and you're fantasizing and you've dehumanized the person in front of you so you can't even feel what they're feeling, like, ugh, right? Primal fucking, when you're in your heart, you love the person in front of you and you see their pleasure. It's the best. So for me, it's like, let's not shame and make wrong male sexual impulses. They're a huge gift. Let's figure out how men can get back in their hearts and back into the deep empathy and like humanizing of everyone, including their lovers, which is crazy to say, but that dehumanization is part of this brainwashing that we've all experienced. And then male sexuality can be the gift that it was meant to be.
100%. Yeah, 100% agree with what you're saying. And with the objectification piece too, like when you have that heart connection there, when you have that depth of presence and trust, then you can go and you can play with the more like typical objectification thing. Like, oh, baby, you look so fucking good. I want to fuck you right now. Like you can say that kind of stuff and it's infused with love.
Yeah.
And it becomes a turn on instead of like, oh, this is a porn object, and yeah, porn. That's a whole other rabbit hole. That's a big context of reality.
Toxic brainwashing. Toxic brainwashing. I'm super excited to tell you all about men's sexual mastery. This is my 7-week training for male sexuality. And I designed it so that you simultaneously get practices and exercises that change your psychological and energetic approach to sex. So you're able to become more primal, more present, more embodied, to release old stories, negativity, anything that's been holding you back from being the most exceptional lover that you are capable of being. And I combined it with 20-minute training, so a beginner, intermediate, and advanced, that you do to train in the holistic tools of sex. So you learn to use breathwork, energy activation, sounding, mindfulness, and movement to train your body and your sexuality to be able to do things like last as long as you want, have multiple orgasms without ejaculation, have tantric experiences of sexuality where you go into far more transcendent and flow states as you're making love. What this does is it trains you to be an outstanding lover. Think of it like going to the gym, but for your sex life instead of your health. A lot of men are like, why would I make sex work? Or if it's not broke, why would I fix it? If you think about it, if you never went to the gym or you never worked out, you would have no concept of how healthy you could be. Most guys have never actually worked on their sex lives ever, and they have no concept of what's actually inside of them, what they're capable of as lovers. Think of how much you could gift your lover or partner if you trained your sexuality. That's what men's sexuality mastery training is all about, helping you tap into the most authentic, powerful, and true expression of your sexuality. It's such a powerful training. So if you're interested and you want to join and check it out, you can head over to laylamartin.com/MSM. So it's laylamartin.com/MSM for men's sexual mastery. I will see you in there. So I would love to hear if I'm a man and I want to start the journey of separating ejaculation and orgasm. Let's talk about that first. Pretty technically. I'm also going to make us some sex magic.
Let's do it.
Yay. And I would love to hear like a step by step, like what are 5 things that I can do to start separating ejaculation from orgasm?
5 things you can do to start separating ejaculation from orgasm. Well, number 1 is just believing that that's possible.
Yeah.
Like at least try on the belief that something like that is possible. I didn't used to believe that was possible. I used to think people were full of shit. I used to think people who could last for 20 minutes or an hour in sex were just lying, So number 1, like open yourself to the possibility that there is a different sexual paradigm that exists, that people are experiencing currently. Like there are many people who are experiencing this, Number 2, breath. I think breath is one of the most underutilized and underappreciated tools that we all have to affect and change our consciousness at any given moment. Right. So I'm just actually going to take a breath right now. I encourage everybody listening to do the same. And I just notice even after taking that one breath, my presence and my consciousness shifts just a little bit, and there's more ease, there's more relaxation, and there's more expansiveness, and there's less of a pressure to need to fill with lots of words quickly. In the sexual context, a couple of weeks ago, my partner and I were making love, and she was on top of me, and I could tell from the look in her eyes, she was wanting to go into that sort of primal animalistic thing. And I was feeling that too. And I thought, oh, okay, here's one of those moments where like, I know what's coming. Like the wild hurricane of amazing sexual pleasure is about to happen. I've got to prep myself for this. And so I started breathing like like really getting into exaggerating it, as a practice to boost my system up. And I think of it sort of as surfing. Like if I see the wave off in the distance and I'm on a board, I have to start paddling in order to prep myself to be able to catch the wave. And if I have enough momentum, I can catch it and ride those waves of pleasure and I can be fine. But if I don't have enough, momentum, the waves are going to pass me and I'm going to not get it, or I'm going to catch it wrong and crash. Right. And so the breath is the way of prepping to catch the wave for myself, so that then when we're going wild and crazy together and all this chaotic physical movement, like I'm not going towards the point of ejaculation.
And why not? What exactly happens when you start breathing like that inside of your body? Like, what do you feel? What changes?
Yeah. I just feel expansion. I guess somatically, I feel sizzles. I feel like, the static on old TV. I feel just expansion and openness and less pressure in my genitals. It's like the pressure that would normally be in my genitals when I'm inside my partner expands to the rest of my body. And it's not like this balloon that wants to push it out my penis. It's like all of a sudden, oh, this is just naturally sort of flowing more easily through the rest of my body. And my body isn't pushing me towards the ejaculatory reflex anymore.
Yeah.
So like breath, like active breathing, like overactive breathing, at least for a little bit to prep the system, is a huge thing in the sexual context and in self-pleasure, which is number 3, but you look like you're about to say something.
So are you inhaling through your nose conscientiously, or are you just inhaling through your mouth?
I think in those moments, like whatever you can do it.
Yeah.
Preference generally for inhaling through the nose. Side note, there's erectile tissue in 2 different parts of the male body. One of them is here. One of them is in the penis. Some people say they're linked. So I like to breathe through my nose in sex.
Okay. You said here, but for those of us just listening to audio, you pointed to your nose. So there's erectile tissue in your nose, and you also held your crotch. So I'm sorry for those of you who missed that visual, but that's what happened.
Yeah. Nose and crotch in male bodies. I believe also in the clitoris.
Yes. So I love that description of what's happening when you breathe, because it's true for me in a female body as well. But I know that that's what's happening in a male body. It's almost like as sexual pleasure builds and as turn on builds, it's almost like your body is designed to start. It's almost like your pelvis feels like it's starting to contract and the pressure is building inside of your testicles, inside of your cock. And it's almost preparing for liftoff. It's like the rocket, like the fuel is starting to push. Yeah. So like the rocket of ejaculation happens. And when you start doing that deep breathing, it's like it releases the pressure. It takes the fuel from going out of your penis and towards ejaculation, and like actually like brings the fuel into your body, expands and brings it upwards. Okay. So you're simultaneously taking the pressure off of your penis, and you're starting to feel more turn on throughout your body. And the reason that you want to do that before, like you're saying, like I'm starting to anticipate it's going to get hotter, it's going to get more intense, is because once you've waited too long to start that breathing, it's like you're past the point of no return. Yeah. Because once you've built too much pressure into this like rocket ship of ejaculation, you can't depressurize anymore. So when you start breathing ahead of time, it's like you're taking the pressure off. And then once it starts building, that circuit is already underway where you're actually lifting the pressure off as you fuck or as you feel more pleasure. And that's what allows, it's almost like a system that you have to kick into gear before it gets too intense.
So to be clear, like as soon as I recognize that I'm about to start being sexual with somebody, I start breathing more deeply as a practice. Like I call it sexual breath work, and it's simple. I just start breathing more deeply to prime that pump. And I do that throughout the sexual experience. And when I anticipate things are going to get more intense, then I ramp the breath up, and you might think, oh, but that's labor. Oh, but I have to work for it. Yeah. Yes. And the doors you open from that are fucking incredible. So why would you not do that? Like it can be so much better than the typical sexual experience. You just have to prime your system.
Totally.
Shall we do some sex magic?
Yes, let's do sex magic. And the last piece I'll just say about that for people listening is there's this other option, which is, my partner recently, I think it's more sexy and it works better when you start doing the breath ahead of time and it depressurizes so that you can keep going. But my partner will actually say, hey, Layla, can we take a break for just a minute? And I'm going to breathe, because that depressurization can also work. It's like if he feels like he's getting real close to the point of no return, we can actually just stop. And he can do that breath. And it also depressurizes it and allows him to have a moment to reset and keep going.
Yeah. Well, let me riff on one more thing then.
Yeah.
And the breath and the like that sort of thing also gives the man an opportunity to like make sound.
Yeah.
Sound is another huge thing that can be really helpful to release the tension that otherwise would be released through ejaculation.
Yeah.
And this is another interesting piece, that if a man chooses to not ejaculate with a woman, a lot of women's sexual programming is wrapped up in like whether or not they're able to make the man ejaculate. And so usually women don't see men in pleasure except for those 7 seconds of ejaculation. A lot of times men are just sort of like stoic in the bedroom, like, this is great. The woman's wondering like, is he experiencing pleasure? I don't know, but I feel really good, So if a man's actually exhibiting pleasure, like, it feels so good. Like getting into it like that, like then it's an opportunity, yes, to release that tension that otherwise would push you towards ejaculation, and to be generative in the sexual experience, to exhibit that you're experiencing pleasure. And that'll offer the opportunity to be in more pleasure. And it kind of uplifts and amplifies the whole thing.
Totally. And the sounding tones the vagus nerve. So you're also switching from your vagus nerve building up towards the ejaculation reflex. Yeah. You're actually calming your vagus nerve and toning it, which actually lets your nervous system ride the waves of pleasure more easily.
Yeah. And a lot of guys aren't naturally vocal. I absolutely wasn't. Like, this is something I had to work a lot on. The messages I got around sex from my family growing up were, sex is nice, but it should be done in private behind closed doors. Nobody should know about it. You should never talk about it. Don't get caught. Don't make sounds. Like, shut it down and have it in a nice little box away from everything else, So the idea of making sound and being heard was terrifying. And it actually shut my system down and actually prevented me from having an erection sometimes, even the thought of doing that.
Yeah. And I will just say that I think it's so much more of a turn on making love with men who are vocally expressive, who you can actually feel that they're in pleasure. You can feel the movement of their bodies. You can feel the expression of their voice. And you can do that in, for men who are like, oh, that could feel feminine. Mm-hmm. You can do that in a way that feels deeply masculine, like deeply hot, deeply expressive. It's actually a bigger turn on. And I used to spend my whole time being like, is he turned on? And then when he'd come, I'd be like, is he in pain?
Because the visual is like, you're not sure, because it looks like sometimes,
Totally. All right, let's sex magic it up. Then we're going to get to step number 3, which is self-pleasure. So this is sex magic. This is a product from my supplement company, Mood. And this actually helps enhance your sensitivity and feelings during self-pleasure or sex with a partner. It's a vasodilator, so you have more blood running through your system. You feel more. And there's a lot of things in here like shilajit and huperzine A that increase lubrication, help you to feel more energy, help you to feel more alive inside of your body. Super fun. And what's wild is we actually originally developed this for women, but men seem to love it more than women. So we have so many male customers. They get super into it. I remember doing a podcast with Aaron Alexander. I gave him sex magic. It was like, I basically had a semi-hard on this entire podcast. So that was how all this started. I was like, why not get my guests high?
I'm ready for
Obviously, it's excellent fucking product placement and it's fun. All right. The thing is, I really like it with sparkling water, but it fizzes over when you put it in sparkling water. So I just keep causing myself this problem on the podcast, which is like, instead of just putting it in regular water, I'm committed to the sparkling water, but then it like, oh, there we go. We're getting the fuzz. We're getting it.
Should I not stir it?
You can stir it, but you stir it slowly. Yeah. It's like a sensitive lover. Oh, yeah. Actually feeling very excited to take sex magic right now. I meant to bring it back with me from Burning Man because I was actually going to use it. I mentioned to people, I'm like a very responsible partier. I say this with a huge caveat of like, I don't have addiction inclination, so I can be very responsible. I've been sober like most of my life. I do lots of sober spiritual practices. And this Burning Man, I was like, I'm going on a bender, going on a fucking bender. And so when I was coming back, I was like, oh God, I really want the Mood products, because as I kind of, have these couple of days of recuperating, getting over my hangover, all of that, like I really want to take Mood. And because of the rain and the mud and all of that, and many of us having to plan our exit strategy, and I couldn't fly out like I was supposed to, I had to go in my friend's RV, and I brought all the Mood products with me. Like, it's literally like 8 a.m. I've been up all night. We've been like, wild times, all of that. They're like, Layla, get in the RV. Layla, get in the RV. We're trying to like miss the like line or whatever. And I'm like throwing my like muddy suitcases in the RV and like, I got to catch my flight and all of that. And then I tossed the Mood products. I like, the last thing I did was I literally ran into my RV and I was like, where's here's the mood. And I got play and ecstasy and sex magic. And I threw it in their RV. And I was like so excited, felt so proud of myself. And then I left it in the RV.
No.
as I was going to the airport. So I'm like, yes, I've just gotten it back.
Cheers.
Cheers.
Salud. So I've tried all of your mood products, actually.
Yay.
I like this one the best. This one, yeah, it tastes delicious. Like I would drink this every day.
Oh, thank you.
So thanks for that. Okay. I will say I don't immediately have an erection, but I do feel good.
Like in this very moment?
In this very moment.
It didn't work instantaneous. It didn't like touch your tongue and just like shing.
No, probably for better. Yeah.
We'll check in 15 minutes.
Yes.
Okay, awesome. It's funny. Usually I sip it, but right now I'm going to fucking slam it. I'm just going to like chug this sex magic.
Carry on some of the bender energy.
Carry on the bender behavior or just try and readjust the serotonin in my brain.
Yum. Yes. Women burp too.
It's so funny. My mom, God bless her, she tried so hard to raise me right. And she was always like, how have I kept an immaculately clean house and like tried to get my daughter to go to cotillion school and have all these manners. And I have this like messy burping daughter, like, just cannot be tamed.
Yeah, we should change that program, rewrite it. Burping should be celebrated. Licking plates in public should be celebrated. Making sounds of pleasure when you're eating at a restaurant, like that should be, thumbs up to that. Thumbs up to that.
All right. So give us number 3, self-pleasure.
Self-pleasure. So developing a sexual relationship with yourself, with myself.
Now we're just burping up sex magic. Please enjoy your training, your men's sexual training with burps.
Forgot that was carbonated water I was downing.
My insistence on sparkling water has many downsides, and yet I won't stop.
All right. I'll speak for myself. My decision to start a self-pleasure practice fundamentally changed my entire life. And it came at a point where I had been struggling with porn addiction and premature ejaculation and erectile dysfunction. Like I used to be a sexual mess when I was younger. I watched porn regularly. I ejaculated to porn regularly. It impacted my romantic relationships. It impacted my success in business or lack thereof in my previous business. And I was just like a lost person, wishing that I had somebody to guide me. Sort of like that's why I'm doing what I'm doing right now, right? So at a certain point, I came to this workshop and they said, okay, for a month, you're going to self-pleasure without fantasy. You're going to self-pleasure without porn. You're just going to dive into what it actually feels like to be in a body and do that for the sake of a practice. And I had paid money for this. So I was like, fuck it. Okay, I guess I'm going to do this. I guess I'm really not going to fantasize about the threesome or the whatever. And I thought I had broken myself. And what I mean by that is it took me almost 3 weeks without watching porn or without fantasizing to actually be able to get an erection again, actually by just reconnecting with my own body and developing a relationship with this sort of internal generative system instead of like an externally stimulated system. Took me a while and I thought I broke myself and it was really concerning. But luckily I had somebody who was there saying, hey, by the way, just keep doing this. Just keep breathing. Just keep exploring what feels good, even in your neck and your arms. Eventually your sexual response system is going to come back online and it's going to be stronger and more powerful than you've experienced before and more grounded and more unwavering. That's what happened to me, which was amazing. But it was going through a period of time of like not knowing if that was going to happen or not. And I say that because there's a lot of guys when they start doing an actual self-pleasure practice, they can't get aroused or they think something's wrong with them or they think they're doing it wrong. But really, no, you're training your brain, you're training your whole nervous system to actually start to experience pleasure without the need for a highly stimulating porn video or a fantasy. And that's a huge thing because of the context of the society that we're living in. So what that will do over time, if you start doing an extended self-pleasure practice on a regular basis, I say at least 20 minutes at a time, at least 3 times a week, your body starts to understand, your penis starts to understand, your brain starts to understand that sex is not just about like, and if you're listening, I just made my hand go up and down and my body sat still. And then I did an ejaculation motion.
I believe that's the international symbol for jerking off.
Yes. Yes. As most of us men have done, it's just, oh, let's just rub it out in a couple minutes, boom, ejaculate, done, get the pleasure hit, move on to the next thing. If you keep doing that repeatedly, your body is just going to have that association with arousal. And then of course that's going to happen in the sexual experience too. But if you self-pleasure for longer over time, as you know, your body can start to relax into the experience of sexual pleasure. And then beyond that, your body realizes ejaculation is not the goal of the sexual experience, at least not the immediate goal. So then you can start to open doors of other kinds of orgasmic pleasure in there when you go for longer. There's something around the 10-minute mark or so, at least for me, when I make it to that point, there's a shift that happens in my system to where my body isn't going towards ejaculation in the same way. Like there's a relaxation that happens, and if anyone listening has ever done meditation or something, there's a point when you're meditating where the brainwaves switch. There's a different sort of program that takes over and you're like, oh, I'm here now. That's what happens to me. And that's what can happen with an extended self-pleasure practice. It might not happen the first time or the third time or the sixth time, but that's why they call it a practice. This is something to do over time to build your skill set. And it's really interesting in our society how for some reason sex doesn't fall into this category of what most people think is a skill they could develop. Like if you want to learn jujitsu, you go study jujitsu and you train your ass off for a long period of time. And then you're still a white belt, somehow we think, oh, I should just take a workshop and in a week be really good at sex. But no, our nervous system needs time to adjust to this.
Yeah. And there's a hidden reason behind that. Like I've just thought of this recently, right? Of like, why don't we think of sex as something that we can work on? If you think about what happened in Europe, right? I'm obsessed with this, why did we get so sexually repressed in Europe, right? And the Catholic Church, if you think about it, was like, we have to lock down people's sexual sovereignty. We have to lock down their ability to find their way into mystical states of consciousness. We have to control them to a degree that they will come to church every single Sunday and believe that what we tell them is the only truth, and then tithe 10% of their income, right? And if we want to keep this organization, right, which was not original Christianity, if we want to keep the organization of the church, right, one of the largest I think it still is the largest private landholder in the world, right? If we want to keep this going, we can't let people find their way to magic, to mysticism, to energy activation, to God states of consciousness. So what happened was a war on drugs, right? Keep plant medicine out of people's hands, and a war on sexuality and a war on women. Because women remember a little bit more easily than men when it comes to sexuality, but both of them have forgotten. So when as a society, we're like, oh, you don't work on your sexuality, right? It's not just that we don't have that concept as society. It's that there was an actual campaign to be like, don't you dare fucking look in that box. Don't look in the box of drugs. Don't look in the box of mystical practices. Do not look in the box of your own sexuality, right? Yes. Can it be so programmed, habitual, and disconnected that you don't dare find your way back to God within you, right? And so I say that because when people are like, oh, I don't want sex to be work, it's like doing that work puts you back in the seat of your own power and back in the seat of your own spiritual sovereignty. And the fact that we don't think that we could even work on our sexuality, there are deep hidden control mechanisms in there that we're like, don't ever go looking in that box. And so to have a pleasure practice is like, yeah, you're going to get so much better at sexuality. You're going to reclaim your body and your sovereignty. You can get unaddicted to things like fantasies or porn, but also you're doing something powerful and you are reclaiming a space that has been taken from all of us very intentionally and very systematically.
This is an intangible thing that's important to talk about and kind of hard to talk about. But what happens after you do a self-pleasure practice for an extended period of time is you start to experience reality differently.
Yeah.
As you know, you start to walk in the world differently. You're like, holy shit, this is what's possible. People start to look at you differently. People are like, what's going on with that person? He seems radiant or she seems totally vibrant. I don't know why. Maybe she's figured something out. Is it the coffee? No, probably not the coffee.
It's also the coffee for me.
Sometimes
but
the
twinkle in the eye is more than the coffee.
I guess, but like the important thing to me is in society, in the current society, so many people think sexuality is this little box that's isolated down in our genitals. And for many people it is because of a lot of the things you just said, but it's so much more than that. Our whole body is a sexual organ. Our brain's a sexual organ. And when we start to unlock our sexual power, it impacts everything. It impacts our family relationships, our friendships, our ability to make money, our ability to be creative. Like it impacts all this stuff because it's our life force, and it's so crucial, in my opinion. If you're alive and you want to get the most out of this life, like start doing some work with your sexuality, start realizing this is actually at the core of your being. And it does impact how you show up in the boardroom. It does impact how you show up at work. Like think about it. If you stay up late, masturbating, watching porn, 11 o'clock at night, which by the way, is statistically the most common time men look at porn, is around that time of night. Well, you're priming your sleep to have porn images in it. You're also priming your system to have shittier sleep because you're looking at lights late at night and you wake up, you're probably not going to perform as well the next day. What if instead you just did a meditation or you just relax and chose not to get that dopamine hit? Like that's going to have a massive effect, maybe not immediately the next day, but cumulatively over time. It's huge and it'll fundamentally shift society.
Right. And the reason that a pleasure practice is so necessary, and you really touched on this, is that you are rewiring your nervous system. So every single time you masturbate and every single time you have an orgasm, you are hardwiring that pathway into your brain. And so when you have watched porn for years and years and years, when you have masturbated in a certain way for years and years and years, two things happen. Number one, that is the pathway that your body associates with climax. And so it's going to want to get on that pathway. So when you try and change the pathway and say, actually, we're going to get there without porn, we're going to get there without fantasy, we're going to get there by being connected to ourselves. Your body at first, as with any new pattern, is like, oh, hell no, right? Like that sounds like a lot of energy input. That's unknown, right? And so you have to give yourself that time to change your pattern. You also have to give yourself the time to build new neural networks, because the network, as you're describing, when you feel really numb inside, you weren't feeling that much, right? Women go through the same thing. When I train women, it's like if they've been fantasizing about the same thing their whole life, if they've touched their clitoris the same way their whole life, if they've been out of their body and in their heads fantasizing to feel themselves or to try a different position, it's like they won't feel anything for a long time. That's literally because the neural network does not exist between that experience and orgasm or pleasure in your brain. So you have to conscientiously build it. It's not always comfortable. That's why a pleasure practice gives you that space to, number one, unhook from the known pathways, which can actually feel addictive, to the unknown pathways, which is uncomfortable, right? If you're just with a lover all the time or doing the same masturbation all the time, you're just gonna be like, fuck it, right? When you create that pleasure practice space, you're like, okay, I'm retraining my body, right? You give yourself that space and you hold the intentionality. You also need to do it frequently, like you're saying, to reprogram yourself. And number two, you can also learn new techniques, right? When we're like, learn how to breathe, if you just try that all of a sudden with a lover, it's probably going to be too much. You want to learn how to breathe on your own.
Totally.
You're also going to start to heal when you do a pleasure practice. You're going to trigger emotions, feelings, healing releases. It is easier to learn to do that on your own at first before you do it with a partner. So the pleasure practice is just so essential for so many reasons.
Yeah. Pleasure practice.
Yeah. It's like going to the gym for your sexuality.
And you can discover all kinds of things that you might never have thought that you would like. Maybe you like butt plugs and you didn't know.
Yeah.
I think we're going to get to that. That's, in my mind, that's point number 5, but we've got point number 4 to get to, and then point number 5.
I'm so excited for point number 5. I don't know what it is. It obviously involves your asshole. Okay.
It does involve your asshole.
Yay! All right. Point number 4.
Point number 4, and this one's a little more, what do I want to call it? I'll just share a personal story, for example. We all have different experiences in our life where we've been hurt. Like hard things have happened. Like even if you're somebody who hasn't experienced a massive trauma, like there are probably things that have happened in your past that will show up in the sexual experience. And just 2 quick examples. And I like to share personal stories because it's really important for other men. And it was really important for myself to understand that, like, hey, other people actually experience hard shit, because what can happen for us is we think we're the only one, right? So I remember one time when I was in my early 20s and I was really struggling with premature ejaculation. I was having sex. I was about to have sex with my partner and she got on top of me. She started riding me and it was great. And it was really connective and we were in love. And then I came in like 30 seconds and she looked at me with this look in her eyes of just like utmost frustration and almost rage and anger. And she was like, that's it. And like, I understand the frustration of it, but it also like deeply scarred me. And there's like a little minor trauma that actually happened there that showed up in me that made me actually afraid to interact with women or even flirt with women for a while after that, because I was afraid of being the guy that would ejaculate too soon because I was that guy. And that was a wound. You know, that was a wound that I ultimately had to address and face and deal with. And so number 4 is like, it's very helpful if you want to open up your sexual system to do an inventory, like look back on your life. What are the hard things that have happened? How can you get support for those hard things? Maybe you do join a men's group. Maybe you go to a workshop. Maybe you work with a therapist, whatever it is. Like the hurt is real. Like, and we as men experience hurts. And most of the time we just stuff it down, you know? So that was a huge one for me. Another really interesting one that I discovered about 8 years ago. I'm 38, by the way, for the record. When I was 5, this is kind of hilarious. But when I was 5 in kindergarten, there was show and tell. You know, show and tell, people bring different things to show and tell. Like you bring your trucks, your crystals, whatever. It was going around the circle. The person before me brought their nice little like toy car. And I was like, oh, I'm so excited. Like, and when they said, Taylor, okay, it's your turn. And I stood up and I pulled down my pants and I said, I brought my penis. And all the little kids loved it. But my teacher like immediately started screaming at me. She was like, Taylor, no, that's bad. Put that back in your pants. Ah! And it was really, really intense. And for me, it was such an innocent thing of like, look at my penis. It's so cool. It's this little dangly thing that comes off of my body. I want to show it to you all, you know? And that was my authentic experience in that moment. And then immediately it was like, no, you are bad. Not just put it away, but you are being bad. You are a bad person. Like hide your penis. That's bad. That's unhealthy. That's shameful, etc. And so I didn't even realize this till my late 20s. And I was in a workshop and I had like a flashback to that moment. And I realized, holy shit, I've thought my penis was shameful for the past 20 years. Like I haven't actually been treating my penis with love or respect. It's been this thing that I've used it for sex, but it's been just sort of like this tool to get the job done, but usually a shameful tool to get the job done. And I'm not actually seeing the true potential of this thing. Like, whoa, broke down in tears. I cried about it, had this emotional release. And then it like addressing that and facing that allowed me to develop a more loving relationship with my penis and to treat my genitals with respect and reverence. And that fundamentally changed how I interacted with women that I was making love with. Like no longer was this organ just a tool to be used, but like, no, I'm penetrating somebody with this loving, powerful thing that's like deserving of reverence, you know? And if I had never been in a workshop to go deeper into my sexuality, to like unearth some of this stuff, that might never have come out. You know, I never would have guessed that impacted me the way that it did.
Absolutely. Those pieces have so much control in many ways over how we express ourselves sexually unless we address them.
Yeah. So that's generally point number 4, just an encouragement to do the work somehow. Like it's directly linked to our sexual response system.
Great. Yay. All right. And before we go to step number 5, I'd like to say that one of my favorite quotes on the internet is when I went to my friend Mickey Agarwal. She had this thing called ButtCon for her company called Tushy, which is a bidet company. And she was asking me, like, she was like, do you want to present? And I was like, of course I want to present. I was like, why didn't you ask me to present at ButtCon? And she's like, what? I kind of think of you as like the pussy woman. And I don't want to assume it's like every orifice.
You're the tantric person. You wouldn't go to the dark places.
I was like, you can associate me with every orifice. I'm totally comfortable with that. She was like, okay. Then I went to ButtCon and I think it was like Men's Health magazine. It was some reporter was like, what do you wish people knew about the asshole? And I was like, I wish people knew that the asshole was a portal to God. And when that was like all over the internet, I was like, I don't want to say I can die now, but like some major check mark just happened that like was unchecked before.
Nice. Bucket list. Thank you.
So asshole, portal to God. Tell us about how it is involved with separating ejaculation and orgasm.
Yeah. Well, a lot of people think the asshole is just an out hole. Like, and for guys, there's a huge amount of shame and a huge amount of fear around anal pleasure. Like my younger self, I'm a heterosexual male, but I did used to have this sort of fear of, if my asshole is even touched in a sexual way, for some reason, it'll change my sexual orientation and turn me gay.
Yeah.
You know, which would be fine. Like, but that was a fear. And that's a fear a lot of heterosexual guys have that actually keeps them from exploring this part of themselves. Most people don't know that we're actually wired with our neurons to experience sexual pleasure in our anus too. Like there's a massive amount of pleasure that's possible there.
For men and women.
For men and women. Yeah. For all bodies, all genders, you know, and for men, we have this extra little thing called a prostate that's inside the anal region. And I'll just say, like, if you've never had a blowjob while your prostate is being stimulated, you are fucking missing out.
Have you lived?
Have you lived? I question if you've really, you haven't felt the full joy of what it's like to be in a male body, So like, if you just want to experience more pleasure, like that's great, but a lot of guys will say that actually experiencing anal penetration themselves is the thing that unlocked their system to be able to experience full body orgasmic pleasure. And if we analyze that a little bit, like, well, look around in society, we have the tight ass syndrome is everywhere. We're all sort of rigid. We're carrying around a lot of tension. Like if you're listening to this right now, I would bet money that you could probably relax your pelvic floor and your anus some amount, even just a little bit amount, And so when we do that, this is at the root of our body. This is at the root of our whole sexual system. And in the yogic systems that you're talking about and some of the tantric systems, like this root is correlated with our deepest survival instincts, our vitality, our sustainability as a being. And so if we're tight there and if we're not open there, like that's going to impact everything we do and our ability to have our sexual energy flow throughout our system. So opening that up how do I want to say this? It just expands what's possible in pleasure. And I do want to acknowledge also that it can be terrifying and very scary to experience. Like the first time I was penetrated by an ex-partner with her finger, it was a deeply powerful and moving experience for me. I got mad, I got angry, and I got scared, and I got frustrated. I got angry at her for some reason, which was totally misplaced projection, but that came up for me. And I realized like, holy shit, this is what it's actually like to be penetrated. Like I'm letting this person into my body. That's so scary. Like get the fuck away from me. Like all this stuff came up. And then I realized, oh my God, like this is what I've been doing to people my whole sexual life. Like I've just been penetrating, not totally mindlessly, but not with the level of mindfulness and care that I could have now that I know what it's like to be penetrated.
Yeah. It's like every heterosexual man should experience anal penetration, full stop, just to understand the vulnerability of it, just to understand what it's like to have a pussy, or if you're going to penetrate a woman's asshole, like to really get what that feels like. It changes the game of how you approach it.
Totally. Yeah. And just to be clear, like I've experienced fingers in my butt. I've experienced toys in my butt. My romantic partner, who's a woman, has pegged me, which means fucked me with a strap on. There's a deeply sexually erotic, amazing, intimate experience. I'm still heterosexual. I'm still attracted to women. So we can just put that fear to the side, right? And I feel so much more open in my system. I feel so much more alive when I have semi-regular like anal experiences. Now I did make a course on anal, and it's so interesting to see like people, when they saw that, they thought, oh, you must be obsessed with anal. Like, you must want anal all the time. And I'm like, no. Like it's great sometimes, but like I'm not obsessed with it. But isn't it interesting that if I make a resource about it, everybody thinks, oh, you must be obsessed. This must be your kink because who else talks about this? I'm like, no, we need to talk about it for the full spectrum of what it means to be a sexual person.
Great. So if I am a man right now listening to this and I want to start to open up anal pleasure, can you share what you would do in a pleasure practice, let's say, to start to explore anal pleasure?
Yeah. So obviously you might want to shower first. And I'm a fan of just touching the outside of your anus, right? What I will say is most people don't find anal stimulation pleasurable unless penile stimulation is also happening at the same time. So yeah, get aroused, touch your penis, touch whatever part of your body you want to, and then just explore with even a little bit of pressure around the anal region. Maybe even start with the perineum, the area between your testicles and your anus, because there's a lot of pleasure that can happen there too. And you might notice as you get closer to your anus, like, wow, this actually feels really good. Maybe I'll go a little bit more. Maybe I'll go a little bit more. And if you're squeamish and you don't want to use your fingers, there's all kinds of toys out there. And I would recommend just start. Just touch yourself, touch your body. Realize that your body is a fucking magnificent instrument of sexual pleasure and aliveness. And like, just start. I don't know.
I gave Andrew, I remember like years and years and years ago, right? I gave Andrew his first prostate massage, which was conscientiously stroking his penis, bringing him into pleasure, and then actually stroking his prostate from inside his anus. And he had an orgasm that blew his mind. It was so different than what he'd experienced from just penile pleasure. And from that, he started becoming interested in exploring his anus. So in his self-pleasure practices, he actually bought, I think I remember it was like a large butt plug, like a long butt plug, and he would touch himself and he would slowly insert it. And he just step by step developed that level of familiarity with his own asshole, because that's also very necessary to being able to enjoy your partner putting a finger up there or a strap on up there or a tongue up there, right? All of which are, it's so funny that we associate the anus with just queer or homosexual, but a woman can do so much to activate the asshole, right? It's totally possible to have a full anal experience in a heterosexual relationship. And thank God for the queer community, and thank God for gay men for leading the way of really owning how sacred anal sex is, how powerful the prostate is for really holding, I would say, this like candle for society of like what is possible for male pleasure in a way that like heterosexual people just forgot, again, like wool over the eyes and like, oh, women don't touch assholes. You know, it's crazy how our own bodies could become so foreign to us and so off limits when there's nothing there but pleasure potential, but orgasm potential.
Yeah. And energetically speaking, I remember one time I was having sex with my girlfriend, my partner, and I had a butt plug in and we had sex for a while. And at the end of the sexual experience, I did choose to ejaculate that time. And I took the butt plug out, and there was this amazing experience that was in my torso and in my hips and my whole pelvic region. It just felt more expansive than I was used to. It felt like there was this spaciousness or this channel that was opened up in me. And there were these deep feelings of connection to the divine and reverence. And we actually just spontaneously just started speaking prayers out loud. And I know that wouldn't have happened if I didn't have that butt plug in. You know, it's a crazy story, but it did open me to God, if you want to call it that.
That's what I say. I say your asshole is a portal to God, and people are like, what the hell does that mean? That's what it means.
It was amazing. It was amazing. We ended up in tears, but I do want to actually give one technique. Yeah. Here's a technique I love. If you want to explore your asshole in the shower, if you're a guy, thumbs up. Just think thumbs up. You can reach around behind yourself, insert your thumb into your anus with some silicone-based lube. Water-based lube doesn't work so well in the shower. The pad of your thumb will actually be right at the perfect spot to stimulate your prostate, and you will feel it. And then the parts of your fingers and knuckles in front of that can stimulate your perineum on the other side. And it feels so fucking good. And then when you're done, you're just in the shower so you can wash off. It's simple, easy. And I think that's my favorite hand technique, more so than reaching around the front with the pointer fingers. The thumbs up the butt.
Pleasure shower. I love it. I'm here to invite you to try something called Magnetic. It's a 21-day challenge of practices that are 2 to 3 minutes long that will make you erotically magnetic, so sensual, so alive, so connected to your body. If you listen to this podcast and you're like, Layla, but how? Magnetic is the answer. It'll give you 21 days of practices delivered directly to you. It's totally free. They'll teach you things like pussy breathwork or cock breathwork, things like sensual movement, falling in love with your body, feeling erotically empowered and confident, all in just 2 to 3 minutes a day. It is my most effective transformative program, and it is the best way to start seeing the results that you are hearing about in this podcast, to get a taste and also to decide if you want to do one of my more extensive paid programs. You can join Magnetic for free by finding the link in the show notes. You can also head on over to laylamartin.com/magnetic. Great. All right, I have 3 rapid round questions.
Yeah,
so
hit me.
The first is, I'm listening to this and I'm like, holy shit, I want to give my partner a blowjob with prostate stimulation. Yeah. What should I do?
Talk about it. Talk about it first. Definitely no surprise fingers in the asshole. That would be traumatizing. Very bad idea. I think have an intentional conversation. Say, hey, I listened to this wild podcast where they said actually men can experience much more pleasure if they have their prostate stimulated. Like, was that something you'd be open to trying?
Yeah.
Why or why not? You'd be surprised, like just what an opening conversation can do.
Totally. And it's like you would give them a blowjob. You can actually stimulate the prostate from the pelvic floor, right? You don't even need to do internal stimulation, but it generally feels better with internal stimulation. Yeah. You want a nail clipped, or if you want to stay like fucking, I don't know what the word is for that. What is the word for my long ass nail when I don't want to take it off? I had to cut it in a pussy massage training, and it was like a French team of people, and I was like crying as I clipped my nail because I couldn't like massage a pussy with a long fingernail. And the French, so French, they were like, Layla, you are aware the nail will grow back. I was like, but I love my long ass nails. So anyways, you either clip your nail or you can do gloves with like a cotton ball around it.
Yeah.
Lubrication, very, very important. And if you're a woman doing this, think of internal insertion into the pussy, right? How someone just putting a finger in your pussy sucks, right? Usually like playing with the outside of the pussy, like dancing around it light, like not even penetrating yet, but kind of pulsating to the opening of the pussy. Mm-hmm. And then when you feel the pussy's receptivity, like it's opened, then you start gently inserting, then waving, and only if the person's like super turned on do you go any more intense than that. So you can do all of that while you are giving him a hand job or sucking his cock, right? Or a person with a penis who doesn't identify as a male, like all of that is 101 blowjob with prostate. And it's not as hard as we think it is.
Yeah. And I would say it's usually important for the guy to feel, or the person with the penis to feel very aroused before anal penetration starts.
Yes.
Like the arousal is something that will help relax the pelvic floor and open. And then, go slow, encourage the person with the penis to breathe deeply and just be with them.
Yeah.
And
Yeah. All right. I'm a man listening to this podcast or someone who wants to learn everything that you've got. And I'm like, okay, pleasure practice. So here's the thing, right? For everyone listening, if you really want to get good at all this, you got to train. Right. You got to you have to sign up for coaching with you. You got to take my men's sexual mastery course. You got to go do a workshop, right? There's no way that you get to sexual mastery with just a single technique, right? It would be like, how do I become a yoga master? And we're like trying to tell you about downward dog on a podcast. Totally. Like you got to actually do it, receive guidance. It's got to become part of your life, part of your practice, right? And the available pieces really are, yes, read books, listen to podcasts, get the information, but then sign up for one-on-one coaching or do retreats or do an online course, because that's where you will actually start to see the real deep results. And for anyone listening who's like, okay, I want to do the 101 practice, right? I'm going to set my timer for 20 minutes. I'm going to do that pleasure practice. What can you take them step by step of what you would have them do to just get started off?
Yeah. So you could set a timer, or a better option might be to create a playlist, a 20, 25 minute playlist, something like that. So you don't have this time piece, because we have so many associations with time and timers and clocks in our culture.
Yeah.
Create a playlist of songs that you like or you think that'll turn you on. And then just make it a process of exploring pleasure. This is what I have people do at first. Like, don't even worry about if you get an erection at first. Sure, touch your penis, touch your genitals, but also touch other areas of your body and treat it as if you're actually like in a lovemaking process. Most guys, when we masturbate, will just sit there or lay still and have our hand go up and down like this and then be done. But no, activate your whole body, move around, change positions, get on your knees, get on your back, get on your side, breathe deeply, make sound, like try to actually act as if you were having a lovemaking experience and really get into it for yourself and just explore what comes up, and do that for 20 minutes or do that for as long as the playlist happens. And if you notice yourself getting less into it or getting distracted by thoughts, you can treat it as kind of a meditation and realize, oh, in meditation, the actual act of bringing your awareness back to the moment, that is the growth practice that is expanding your capacity. It's not necessarily your brain's ability to stay consistently focused for an extended period of time. It's when you do get distracted and you do come back, that's when the muscle actually strengthens. It's the same thing in the sexual practice context.
Yeah. And I think something that's very, very helpful for men doing this practice is to get yourself as close to ejaculation as you can and use the tools that we've shared in this podcast, right? Breathe really deeply, experiment with sounding, right? Know that you can do it, because what happens is as you go to the edge of where your body might have previously said, okay, now we have to climax, and you start using the breath and you start using the sound, you'll start to actually experience what we've talked about in this podcast, which is like, oh shit, I can defuse the locked and loaded ejaculation impulse and start moving it up and into my body, right? This is very powerful.
But here's an interesting thing that can happen though, too. If what I've found is if guys and myself, if we focus on edging too much and we try to keep going to the edge, stay there, like the edge becomes kind of like the ejaculatory focus. Like it keeps the ejaculation in the mind. So yeah, I do encourage like explore the edge, but then come back down and get into the lovemaking experience when you're not right there at the edge, because that's where your body is really going to build its capacity to like not go towards ejaculation, basically.
Yeah.
My opinion.
And then my last question for you, you actually said it in a part that we redid, so people didn't get the pleasure of hearing it. But when you were telling about your bio, right, which they'll hear a little bit of it in this podcast, but they miss one piece of it, which you were like, when you were younger, you didn't feel like you attracted women at all. You didn't feel like women were interested in you. Yeah. Once you started doing all of these practices, what changed inside of you? What was different?
Oh man, so much. Yeah. So, I mean, I'll just do like a short version because I know we're at the end here, but yeah, I used to be really unpopular in high school. I was a science kid. I built model rockets. Nobody was interested in me. And in my early 20s, like some people started to be interested in me, but I was terrified of women because I was afraid of being the guy that would ejaculate too soon. Then I was addicted to porn. Then my business struggled, etc. I started exploring semen retention. I started exploring not watching porn and noticing what that did for my relationships, what it did for my business. And I remember the first time I had sex and I chose to intentionally not ejaculate, but circulate that energy around in my system. This is obviously a very fast forwarded version of the story. I went to the grocery store, and on the drive there, I was like, holy shit, I feel like I got the gold star in Super Mario Brothers. I'm like, everything is fucking amazing. My whole body is charged up. I walked through the grocery store feeling like I was on fire in the best way possible. Like my posture was taller. I felt just this sizzling aliveness go through my whole system. I'm convinced people treated me differently. Whether they did or didn't, it didn't matter because I didn't care. I was just really immersed in my own goodness and my own groundedness and my own pleasure. And what I noticed is the more I did this, the more intentional I was with this, the more confidence I had when I was going into negotiation around contracts. I would start to make more money. And then it started this snowballing effect. Like, oh, now I'm able to have these greater sexual abilities because I'm doing these practices. My partner is more happy, or my sexual, even short sexual experiences with people, they're more satisfied. It's just like this snowball building effect built and built and built and built. Not to say I didn't fuck up in the process. Like this is a danger. Like here we are on this podcast. We have this platform. Like I'm not perfect. I'm sure you fucked up many a times too. So I did that too. But like learning how to roll with that in the process, doing these practices made it easier for me to acknowledge like, okay, I've got some shit here I need to work out too. And then we can move on to the next step. But it has fundamentally changed every aspect of my life.
Totally. And from like a deep tantric perspective, I'm very interested in people unwinding using sexuality and kundalini and energy, practices to become like a more, to feed the egoic concept of being special and to also become a hungry ghost of trying to feed things that can't be fed with any amount of sex or any amount of partnership. And there is a real truth to the fact that doing these practices makes you sexier. It makes you more magnetic. I too was not like a ragingly attractive, magnetic force when I was younger, and I was shut down and insecure in a lot of ways. And I would never have imagined that I could get more magnetic, more sexy, more attractive as I got older. And yet sexual practices have given that to me. So I just wanted to highlight that part of your story.
Yeah. And I think the hungry ghost thing is important. And just to wrap at least one thing that I wanted to say up is like, why do these things? Like maybe some people don't care about this stuff. That's great. But I think our sexuality and society, we have so much shadow and shame around sexuality that doing this work actually can create a new society. Like imagine if every fucking politician started doing a self-pleasure practice, we would live in an entirely different society. And so for me, it's not just about the greater sexual pleasure. It's not just about being more attractive, making more money. Like all those things are great. But ultimately what it's doing is it's bringing me closer to life and closer to being able to be more of service, more in service to the world, and to create better experiences for everybody. Like it just helps me be a better person overall at my core. And I feel like if I didn't do this work, if I just avoided sex, sure, I could do good things in the world, but I don't feel like I would be doing it with the same amount of zest or effectiveness that I am now because of doing this work.
Yeah. And I love that Super Mario Brothers analogy of like whatever, eating the special like star or like, I don't know, the mushroom's not right because it's not like taking plant medicine, although it can feel like that, but it's like stepping on the star and like getting the special powers. Because when I first learned Taoist practices and I would do my self-pleasuring in my room, right? I was literally a teenager. I was like 18, 19 years old. Wow. And I would go downstairs in my co-op in Berkeley and I would have been like channeling my energy and I'd be in the kitchen. I'd be like, holy shit, this stuff works. I feel like, and it's fun to say, that is a stepping stone. You progress beyond that. Spirituality is so much deeper than that. And how cool that we have so much magic and power inside of us. And to your point, what would the world be like if we were more in touch with our energetic superpowers and could give even more of our gifts to our families, to our lovers, to our jobs, to our calling, right? We're all energetically depleted. Why not tap into this immense source of energy?
Right. Yeah. Like I'm not trying to achieve enlightenment and go out. I'm trying to like be as here as possible and give as much as possible and make this place better than I found it.
Yeah. All right. How can people find you? How can they work with you?
Find me all over the internet. You just Google search for Taylor Johnson Sex. I'll be the first person to pop up. I'm on Instagram at Taylor Clark Johnson, on YouTube as well. Yeah.
Wait. Your name is Taylor Clark Johnson?
It is.
It really does sound like a porn name. Taylor Johnson Sex sounds like you are going to find some like new school Ron Jeremy. I just got to say, it's like the Easter egg that you're like teaching the opposite of porn, but you sound like such a porn star.
Supposedly there's a famous Taylor Johnson out there, and I'm slowly rising in the search rankings. So sorry, dude, or you're welcome.
You sure are rising in those rankings. All right. Thank you so much for being here. Thank you for this conversation. Such an honor. So inspiring. Thank you for the work that you're doing.
Yeah. Thank you so much for having me, Layla. It's been great. I love this conversation. Thank you for listening. And yeah.
Thank you for listening to This Tantric Life. I am Layla Martin. This is the home for the realest conversations about sex, spirituality, polarity, conscious relationships, and all kinds of topics that help us live the absolute most incredible lives. Please check out the next episode. Please go ahead and leave your rating and review on Spotify or Apple or YouTube. It's so helpful when you do that. If you want to stay connected to me, the most helpful supportive thing you can do is to head over to laylamartin.com, sign up with your email address. That connects you to me if you want to study deeper with me, if you want to receive my deeper teachings. I do it predominantly via email. Finally, you can check me out on Instagram at @the Layla Martin. And thank you so much for being here.